All right, so where we left off was page xxviii. We're still in the very early part of this book. And this is the doctor's opinion.
Okay, everybody find it?
xxviii, that's 28 in the Roman. Wouldn't have known that until I got here. So anyhow, this is the doctor's opinion, and what this is about, to put this into context, especially for anybody new coming here this early in our readings, it's a good time to be here because you're going to catch some of the, I guess for a newcomer, some of the most important information that they're going to need to know. We know that the first step, as it reads up here on this wall here, talks about us admitting we're powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable. And apparently that's something that we must do, right? Must. We admit, how do we admit we're powerless over alcohol? And what the hell does that mean anyway? What does it mean? What does that actually mean? Powerless over alcohol. And then they're talking about my life being unmanageable. Is it unmanageable? I mean, I still got a job. I still got a car. Might still have a wife. What does all that mean? No directions up here. I'm getting it. These are footnotes talking about what they did. However, this book is written as we learned in the opening remarks. What is this book about? What is Alcoholics Anonymous about? The fellowship and the book. What's it about? One thing. It's about the story, one singular story of how many, not many thousands of different stories. One thing that many thousands of people did. Set of directions. And the basis to it is, if you know, the idea is this is what we did, as it was mentioned, and we all recovered as a result of doing these things. And if you're interested and you're new and you haven't found a solution to your problem, we'll show you what we did. And if you're interested in doing it, you might get what we got. It's been proven to work. Actually, it says later on that it's rare for anyone to fail if they thoroughly follow our path. So that's why we got the book, so we can thoroughly follow the path. Without the book, I don't know how we can thoroughly do that. I mean, I've studied this book for a number of years now, but whenever I sit down with somebody to work with them, I always still use the book. I'm not going off of my opinion or what I think I kind of remember. We want them to thoroughly do what we did. They tell us, I think on page 29, that they're going to present to us clear-cut directions showing how they recovered. So this is very specific, clear-cut stuff that we're learning. The first step is obviously in the beginning, and I tell you, Tom had mentioned that the first 32 pages he kind of skipped over, you know, through his processes, journey, and recovery. And I can tell you that I think I pretty much skipped over all 500 and something pages for the most part for the decades that I've been going to AA. Certainly didn't read the Romans, but nonetheless, I didn't know I had to. I thought we just come to meetings and then whatever you guys got, it kind of rub off on me. And they kind of presented it that way. Keep coming back, you know, stick with the winner. So if I stick with you, it's going to stick to me. I mean, how does this work? And it never quite worked that way. I was able to stay sober, but I never recovered, and I never got, because they always read at the meeting those promises, and that never seemed to click with me. Like I never felt that. I mean, things were better, but I never felt that I had what they were talking about. And so until I started learning this stuff, did things start to change. So anyways, the first step again is up there. And but we also learned last week that the first 100 that wrote this book, they weren't doing those things because those things weren't even presented as 12 steps until the 5th chapter of this book was written. And by the time that the 5th chapter of this book was written, more than 100 already recovered. Right? So they didn't have 12 things. We read on page XVI that there were 6 things that they were doing. And I want to just visit that very briefly on page XVI.
Okay, hold it. Let's get everybody on xxviii.
And,
Right, everybody ready?
and if you drop down 8 lines from the top, starts out saying next pages and then a period. The next sentence I want to read says that from this doctor, the broker learned the grave nature of alcoholism. So when they talk about this doctor, they're talking about Dr. Silkworth. He happens to be the one that wrote this doctor's opinion we're about to read. And he apparently presented to what they're calling a broker, which is Bill Wilson, who was AA number 1. He taught him because he said he learned. Good thing we got a textbook here to learn from. He learned the grave nature of alcoholism. The grave nature of alcoholism has to do with this powerlessness over alcohol. And we're going to find that Bill could not get well until he learned that information. Didn't really take any doing, just learning, right? And then near the bottom of the page, when he reaches out to Dr. Bob and starts working with him, it says that Dr. Bob could not recover until he learned the grave nature of alcoholism, which Bill Wilson explained to him, not with his own words, though. It says he gave Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, its general hopelessness. And then Dr. Bob was able to muster a willingness that he'd never been able to gather before to get well. Point is, both of these guys had to learn the grave nature of alcoholism, right? And where did they get that information? From Dr. Silkworth. Even though Dr. Bob didn't get it directly from Dr. Silkworth, Bill gave him exactly what Dr. Silkworth told him, which is the reason, again, both of those guys had to learn this before they would become willing to do any of these other things that are up here. We are no different. We need to learn the grave nature. We need to, like somebody had mentioned that we use a dictionary here, and we do, but I don't think we need to look up the word grave, do we? Everybody got an idea what grave nature of alcoholism? Deadly, right? Right. How's it deadly? How is this powerlessness? How does that powerlessness equal hopelessness equal deadly? How does all that work? That's what Dr. Silkworth explained to Bill Wilson and to Dr. Bob, exactly how all that works. So the great thing is the first thing after we get through all those forwards is the first page we come to on page XXV is the doctor's opinion. It's the first thing they present to us, which is the first thing that was presented to Bill for him to get well. First thing that was presented to Dr. Bob to get well. We are getting, and it was also mentioned in the opening comments that the section called the doctor's opinion, that was left intact exactly as it was originally written in 1939. They didn't change a word of this. Why? So we can learn from the doctor's mouth specifically and exactly what he told Bill and exactly what he told Dr. Bob 80 some odd years later. We're going to get that exact same information. That's the purpose of this. So it's very, very important stuff that we're going to be learning here. So I just wanted to open with that. And we, again, are on xxviii. And I believe we ended doing the first full paragraph, but I'm going to recap that again.
Hold on.
xxviii, that's 28 in Roman.
Everybody keeping up? All righty.
And what we're going to learn about in this is two things, this doctor's opinion. And it was mentioned earlier. What did these guys say they suffered from? A seemingly hopeless state of what?
Mind and
Mind
body.
and body. Two-part illness, mind and body. That they claim it seemed to be hopeless, a seemingly hopeless state. That means they tried getting over it and they couldn't. No possible means of a solution for these guys. So mind and body, that idea, opinion, if you will, from the doctor about something wrong with the alcoholic's mind and their body, that came from him. And that is what AA's idea of powerlessness has to do with. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous description of the alcoholic has to do with, this illness, the condition that prevents the normal functioning of the mind and or body is what we have. And we start out on this first full paragraph. We're going to talk about what the doctor believes is wrong with our body. Never thought there was anything wrong with my body. In fact, I don't think I was presented that until I'd been in AA for probably close to 15 years before I even heard anything about our body being wrong. But anyhow, it says, the doctor says, we believe, the doctor and everybody works for, remember, he's the chief physician at this hospital. He says that we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics, chronic alcoholics, chronic just means something that's repeated over and over again. These chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, and the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. Once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, the reliance upon human things, the problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. He just explained what most of us go through by the time we get here. The first thing he says is, what's wrong with our body? We're allergic to alcohol. Who would have thought? You know, that's always been baffling to me. Anything that we talked about this last week, somebody who has an allergy to anything, they don't go around it, right? You're allergic to milk, you don't go drinking a lot of milk. You're allergic to bees, you stay away from them. I didn't stay away from alcohol. I drank a lot of it. How could I have been allergic to it if I'm drinking so much of it? That's the thought. The thing is that he says that the manifestation, the way that this allergy works, is that the person who is allergic, when they come in, this is with any allergy. If you're allergic to something, when you come into contact with the allergen, the thing that you're allergic to, you'll have an allergic reaction. And generally that can be runny eyes, runny nose, hives, whatever. It's something that generally you can see, you certainly feel, but others can even see this allergic reaction. This is a different type of allergic reaction, he's saying. The allergic reaction that the alcoholic gets, he's calling a phenomenon of craving. Phenomenon simply means it's something he doesn't understand how it works, but he knows it's there. So it's a phenomenon of craving. What that means, he's saying, is that when the alcoholic puts one drink into his system, consumes one drink, he will present a physical craving, physical, not mental, a physical craving beyond his mental control to stop. Which goes back to explaining, as we discussed last week, why many of us, when we started having problems with alcohol, not all of us, but many of us, before we just say, oh, I got to quit, we usually take this in steps, like, well, maybe I just need to control the amount that I'm taking. I'm not going to get all this serious and quit, but this time I'm going to go out and I'm only going to have 3, and I'm going to control the amount that I'm taking. And we find we can't. We find that we end up having a lot more than we intend to. And if you ever ask any alcoholic, especially one that goes out after coming around AA for a little while and maybe leaves and comes back after a relapse, what they call it, or they call it a slip, which is interesting that we call it a slip. It's never called a slip in here. And if you think about a slip is accidental. The alcohol did not accidentally fall into my mouth. I've never had that happen. I relapsed plenty of times in my time. It's never been an accident. In fact, we find that it's a deadly thing, right? So wouldn't it be better classified as a failed attempted suicide? Right? It's a deadly deal. So anyhow, going back to, so he says that when we put it in our system, we have this physical craving beyond our mental control. We can't stop. We have more than we intend to. And he says that this allergic reaction is limited to this class, these chronic alcoholics, because it doesn't happen to normal people. And I always like looking at my wife. She is not an alcoholic. She might drink a couple of glasses of wine a month, maybe, and maybe not. She had a good reason. She'd quit altogether, but it just doesn't matter. She's one that will drink 1 or 2 and I'm done. And even talk, I'm done. I'm starting to feel this. I need to stop. And I never quite understood that first time I heard that, because I'd never said that before. By the time I got in my 2nd or 3rd, she's ready to stop. I'm ready to get going. She talks about feeling out of control. I start feeling in control. I could clearly, after I learned this, I could clearly see the difference with her experience with alcohol and mine, and clearly showed me that this is this is limited to this class, people like me, right? So we have this happen. He says that the doctor says the only solution that he has for these allergic types is that we can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. We get that, in any form at all. So any of you that may have, we'll read about this later, a lot of us will try to go through this phase. Well, I'm just going to stop with the hard liquor and I'm only going to drink beer, or maybe I'm only going to drink O'Doul's, which does have a little bit of alcohol, but I'm just going to drink that. Whatever, even Formula 44D.
Hey, Gary, make
Go ahead.
no mistake about it. To be classified as an alcoholic beverage, it has to have more than half a percent of alcohol. O'Doul's and all of that stuff has alcohol in it. And
Thanks,
I have, over the years, I have watched men think that they can do that, and one of the guys who we know, Julia's looking at me and with a sad look on her face. One of our friends, Mike, started on that and ended up going back into this thing and dying, and it was just on O'Doul's. So I'm sorry to interrupt, man, but I just want to make sure people are clear. Do not play with that stuff.
That is important information, and that's just another qualifier there, right? So I don't know what the government needs to have something labeled as alcohol, as Will had said, but the doctor says it doesn't matter. We can't use it in any form at all. Because what's going to happen? We're going to have a physical craving for more. And it might not be of that. It'll move into, as Will said, and I'm sure the guy, like me, may have had a couple of drinks and was able to control it. But over a period of time, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And you see where it led to. So he says we can't have it in any form. So, but then he says, once we form this habit, and this is where the doctor starts switching from the body to the mind, because a habit is defined as a repeated pattern of the mind, right? So this is something we're doing. We're trying to control the amount we drink. We keep failing at it. We drink more. Just trying to control the amount. We fail at it over and over. And he goes on to say that we got this habit and then we find we can't break it. So now he's talking about, we get to the point where, well, I can't control him. I guess I'm being forced to the point where I know I'm just going to have to quit. I just can't drink at all because I can't even control it when I try to control the amount. I can't. So I need to quit. And then he says that we find we can't break it. We can't. Anybody try stopping drinking before they came to AA as a solution and found that they could not break that habit? So that's what he's talking about, is our type. So he says that we find we can't break it. We've lost our self-confidence. So obviously we have tried using our own willpower to stop. And we found we couldn't. That's losing confidence in myself. What's wrong? Right? And then maybe we start reaching out to other humans for another solution. He says that we end up losing our confidence in the reliance upon human things. So we may look for a human solution. We may go to a treatment center. We may talk to, get religious counsel. We may go to therapy. And we find that those things aren't working. Costing a lot of money, most of them, but they're not working. We're not finding any human solution to this. So then what happens? I can't stop. Nobody else can help me. And he says, where we end up is that our problems pile up on us and become astonishingly difficult to solve. And I'll ask you, when you come to your first AA meeting, was it because you thought, man, I just really don't want to drink anymore? Or is it because your problems had piled up and become astonishingly difficult to solve? It's a little hint about what they're talking about, our lives becoming unmanageable, right? We're reaching out for anything to save us. Doctor doesn't know anything about this, though. He's just saying, this is how we see this happen with your type. And you end up dying that way. He didn't have a solution. He did not offer Bill a solution. All he offered Bill was saying, that is a hopeless condition, dude. This is what I do for a living. I'm the chief medical director of a hospital that specializes in alcohol and drug addiction. And your type, I've not been successful with. We don't have a solution for you. You're going to die that way.
Okay, page check. Give us a page check. Where you at?
We are at the bottom of the first paragraph on xxviii.
XX
VIII.
at the bottom.
At the bottom of the first paragraph, the
Okay,
end of the first paragraph.
thank you.
So that's what that whole first paragraph's about, is what's wrong with their body. Doctor goes on to say, in the next paragraph, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. Has anybody ever had frothy emotional appeal from somebody saying, God, please stop, please, for her sake or for my sake, I'm going to leave you if you stop, please. That ever suffice? Because that doesn't work. The message that can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. The depth and weight I ever found is what I found in this book. Must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, according to the doctor, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. Now that's interesting. This guy's a doctor and he's talking about God. He's talking about a power greater than themselves. The only thing that he sees as a solution. Isn't that interesting? And also notice it doesn't say if they are to get sober. We ain't even read the word sober yet. Sober by definition is two words, not drunk. That's all it is. And I always like to go back to because it just seems to be so pressed in AA that that's what we're looking to do here is get sober. We got chips and all this stuff to celebrate how long somebody's been sober, as if that's the problem. And now that you're not drinking, you've got the problem solved. But I will contest that if you go to your first meeting and you are not drunk at your first meeting, you are sober. If your problem was drinking, You are now sober. You've already solved it. You're not drinking. How do you feel? We find that our problems continue to pile up on us and become astonishingly difficult to solve. It's not about the drinking. Drinking is a relief from that, is what we're going to find. But like I said, he doesn't talk about getting sober. He's talking about recreating our lives. That's what we're looking to do here, is to recreate our lives, not just to learn to stop drinking, right? A recreation of our lives. If any feel a psychiatrist directing a hospital for alcoholics, we appear somewhat sentimental. Let them stand with us a while on the firing line, see the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work and even of their sleeping moments. And the most cynical will not wonder why we have, one, accepted, and two, encouraged this movement, this fellowship, this movement. What does he mean by a movement? What is a movement? Probably go back to the beginning of the doctor's opinion on xxviii, where they talk about the movement, what they do. How does the movement work? What is the basis for our movement? Exactly what Bill did. We get these conceptions on how to get well. We put them into practice. We get well. That's part one. Part two talks about we commence to present these conceptions to other alcoholics. In part three, those that do recover, we impress upon them that they must do likewise with still others. It's exactly what, well, I can tell you that's exactly what I'm here doing today. I'm trying to present to you what's been presented to me. It's not anything, I'm not an AA guru. I just learned what's in this book. I'm presenting to you what's been presented to me. That's part of my recovery, right? That's part of what keeps me well. Now, granted, I am recovered, but understand that that does not mean cured. As it was mentioned earlier, it just means I've been returned to a normal state of health. Not to say I can't go back to that other state, and I had done that plenty of times. So there's things I have to do after I get well. After I become recovered, I have to continue to work with others. That's what he's talking about, this movement that he's encouraging and accepting. He says that we feel after many years of experience that we, as a medical community, we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. That's alcoholics and non-alcoholics, right? In many environments, when people drink, it's a lot of times this is just a social lubricant, makes everybody just feel a little bit better, right? That's nothing new. That's nothing different from us and them. However, for the alcoholic, it says the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. I would underline that. They cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. And we are going to get into that over and over as we get through this chapter, this idea of what's wrong with our mind that we can't differentiate the true from the false. He says to them, their alcoholic life seems to be the only normal one. And he says for us, now we're going to go into what we call the cycle here. It's one of the most important things. I think it is probably the most important thing as far as I'm concerned of what's in this section here, because it tells us how the mind and the body work together. And he says this is a cycle that all addicts, okay, I'm not talking just alcoholics. He specialized in alcohol and drug addiction. This is how all addictions work. He says when we don't have that in which we are addicted to, when we're sober, if you will, he says we're restless, irritable, and discontent. We're not happy when we're sober. And unless we can again experience the sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once after taking a few drinks. So he's saying that we're miserable when we're sober, and we start thinking about the sense of ease and comfort that comes from a few drinks. Does anybody relate and understand what that ease and comfort, that desire for that ease and comfort from a few drinks feels like?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is that's what we're thinking about. But ask yourself, how many times did it stop once you got it? After that few drinks. Isn't that weird? All we're thinking about is the sense of ease and comfort we're going to get from a few, yet we hardly ever have a few. But that's what we're thinking about. That's how the mind works. Thinking about a few drinks. Drinks, by the way, that we see others taking with impunity. See, other people are able to drink just a few and do just fine. So that becomes the reason I can do this. And then he says the cycle continues because then we succumb to that desire again. And he doesn't say how long that happens. Okay. You might be quit for months or even years. not happy, but sooner or later, if you're an alcoholic, you will succumb to that desire again and have that first drink, as so many people do. So I said I'm quitting, and now I picked it up. And it says, as soon as I pick it up, the phenomenon of craving develops. Well, of course, because I put the first drink in. Forget about the third and the 30th. The first drink goes in. Now I'm drinking based on my body, giving me a physical craving beyond my mental control. Mine's gone. So we have this physical craving, and then we pass through the well-known stages of a spree. A spree is defined as unrestricted overindulgence. Think about your drinking when you went out to drink, to have that few to give you the ease and comfort. How many times could you have characterized it as unrestricted overindulgence? Right? Well-known stages of the spree. And he says after the spree, the way he sees this work is we emerge remorseful because usually something happens. And it doesn't matter what happens. I always like thinking about this because I cannot tell you how many meetings I've gone to over the years where when we sit and talk about the first step, we talk about, most of the time is spent talking about what happened. We're going to talk about step one. Okay, my name's Gary, I'm an alcoholic. Let me tell you how I lost my wife. And let me tell you how I got in this car accident. Let me tell you about how many times I was locked up in jail. Nobody cares. That does not classify you as an alcoholic. That's apparently what we're trying to do, but it doesn't. All that matters is that you ended up trying to control the amount you took more than you intended, and you went into a spree and you emerge remorseful, right? So we emerge remorseful. And then when we're remorseful because something happened, says the last part of that spree, we end up having a firm resolution that I'm never going to drink again. Done. The ends do not justify the means. The reward does not exceed the penalties that I pay for it, the consequences, right? Consequences are too great, I'm done. That's perfectly normal thinking, isn't it? That is certainly the ability to differentiate the true from the false. This is not worth it anymore. I'm going to quit. Doctor says that the cycle ends there. The same thinking, I'm done. So it's called a cycle because the next thing he says is, this is repeated over and over. So we're at the end, we're using this firm resolution, my willpower, and I am done. I quit, I am now sober. And then what happens when we're sober? We start getting a little restless, irritable, and discontent. Start getting miserable, and we start thinking about the ease and comfort that we're going to get from that alcohol. And when you think about that, that answers the whole question about, is alcohol the problem? Think about that. I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. I'm miserable. I'm reaching for alcohol. I'm not reaching for a problem. I'm reaching for a solution to my problem that's going to make me feel better. Alcohol is my solution. What's my problem? My problem is when I'm not drinking, I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. Why is that? Normal people, when my wife doesn't have alcohol for 3 months, she doesn't get restless, irritable. She does when every once in a while, but it's not because she has not, it's not because she has not had alcohol in 2 or 3 months, right? But that's what happens to us, and that's what leads us back into it over and over again. So we so really, you know, when we come to AA, if you think about this whole thing coming in, most of us think, why can't I stop drinking? And if you read this carefully, you're asking the wrong question. The question should be, why do I start drinking again? You want to get close to figuring out what our problem is? Why do I start? Right? Because we can stop. Like I said, most of us, our first meeting, we're not drunk. Why do we start? Okay, does anybody have any questions about that? Because that's really the doctor is talking about what is wrong with our mind, what is wrong with our body. And if you think about those two issues, it's not, those two issues by themselves are not a hopeless condition. If I simply was allergic to alcohol and I can't control the amount I take and I get into a lot of trouble when I drink, okay, if that was the only thing, then all I need to do is stop. Just like if you're allergic to bees, all you gotta do is stay away from them. If I don't pick up a drink, I'm good. That is not a hopeless condition. All I gotta do is stop. Conversely, if the only problem is my mind that I can't stop, if that was the only thing that was wrong is that I can't stop drinking, as long as I could control the amount that I took, it wouldn't be a problem. If I could go out to have a few drinks and get the ease and comfort and stop, that wouldn't be a problem if I can't stop. Completely stop. If I can control the amount I take, that's not a problem. But when you put the two together, that every time I drink, I basically get drunk and emerge remorseful. And every time I try stopping, I can't. You put those two things together, and this is a deadly cycle that will kill us sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but that will always materialize if we keep working at it. We will kill ourselves. It's a deadly condition. You understand that? Anybody have any questions about that? Because it's a lot of information packed in there. Hey, Patrick.
I do. I'm Diane.
Hey, one second.
And through the years, I've always heard that, well, the reason that I picked up again was because I'm an alcoholic. And I went, oh, okay. Yeah, but I came so close to death. Why? Was all the outside things of me. So I liked how you presented that in that irritable, restless, and discontent. Like when that comes, I should really hang on. Or will you talk some more about that? Why did I start drinking so many of those times? I come so close to the edge in my group. I'll say I'm close to the edge. That's
Well,
of vital importance. Thank you.
Diane, we're going to get into a lot more of that. That's previews of coming attractions. We're going to be spending a lot of time figuring out why that is for sure. And people don't lie when they say that. If somebody comes to me and says, well, I drink again because I'm an alcoholic, they probably don't know how true that is. They did drink because they're an alcoholic. Problem is, most of them, including myself, have no idea what it means to be an alcoholic. Why did I pick it up? We just learned why we picked it up, right? We just learned it. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, really enjoyed that. You know, about the restless irritable and discontent. Still gonna have that even when I've gone through the step, I still run through that. Those periods of irritability, restlessness. Still run through those. So my only option is to keep that in control.
So that's an interesting point, and that is previews of coming attractions. But in short, I mean, when we get into reading Bill's story, Bill talks about that he recovered. He had a spectacular recovery too. Wind blowing through, saw God, everything. It was a sudden spiritual experience he had that changed him instantly. Yeah, we read on the next page, he starts going through these fits of depression and so the thing is yes, we do recover, right? But what keeps us not rest? This is really, to me, from everything I read, this boils down to, our problem is we can't be sober and happy. That's if you want to put it in short. We need to find a way of being sober and happy. Now, many of us, including myself, I've been able to stay sober for a number of years, not recovered, but sober, and still going to AA and stayed sober for a long time, and ended up with a gun to my head ready to blow my brains out in my closet because I was so miserable. Didn't want to die, just could not stay in the misery, and picking up was not an option. You know, that desire had been removed. I had no option. Let's live with this misery or die. And that's what I had chose to do. What we find is that while yes, we recover from the condition, that is why we do the other two pieces. That is why most of this book doesn't even talk about the recovery process. The majority of it talks about working with other people and specifically how to do it. That is what allows us to be able to live sober and happy. Very different. That's what, without that piece of working with other people, I do not know how anyone would be able to, that's an alcoholic, would be able to be sober and happy. We're going to read case study and case study and case study all about that. But that's what takes care of that problem. And that's really how this spoke to me, because I had been sober 16 years when I sat down at a meeting and a guy was doing this exactly the way we're presenting it today in Florida. And it's kind of like this forum, kind of like if you want to speak, you kind of raise your hand because the guy in the front's usually the only one speaking, right? And I didn't care because I didn't like some of the things he was saying. How could that be? And I just interrupted. And he was so patient with me and kept explaining this to me. But really, I didn't know it. But what I was doing, I was challenging what he had to say, because it's not stuff I heard in AA. It's not stuff I was doing. It's not stuff I heard anybody doing or even talking like. And my God, I'd been around AA since I was 15. Do not tell me you've been sober, what, 6 years? Don't tell me that you can't know half of what I've forgotten in AA, is what my thought was, right? But what kept me arguing instead of just getting up and walking out of the room, and you're going to see this, You start presenting this stuff, you learn this, you get well, and then you try presenting it to other people because my God, we got a real solution. You want to go out and give it to people. You'll be surprised in AA how much pushback you're going to get on this stuff. You know, if they think it's working for them, they're just going to keep doing it that way and they don't want to hear anything you got to say. The only ones that it really captures are people who have, just like I was at that time. I'd been going to AA for a long time and I didn't admit this at the time, but it wasn't working. So I'm challenging what you're saying and I'm trying to poke it until I was finally, well, let's try it because this isn't working. Once I tried it, I found out that I was wrong and I learned so much bad information in AA over decades, you know. And of course you're going to. When your clear-cut directions aren't here, if we're sitting down in a meeting without this book, what are we doing other than giving our opinions? What's that doing to a newcomer? You're gonna hear 3 different opinions about the same thing. Okay, there's your clear-cut directions. Figure out what works for you. Right? Of course. So this is a solution to that restless, irritable, and discontentedness. When
Paragraph you were in the last sentence offers a clue of what needs to be done.
oh, we're getting to that right now. Yeah, I want it. Thank you, Win.
Page
Everybody-
check, where you at?
We're on XXIV, the end of that first paragraph. So up to now, the doctors talk about what? The problem, the mind and the body. So he goes into, again, saying this process repeated over and over, but get this, doctor's opinion. Unless this person can experience what he's calling an entire psychic change, there is very little hope for his recovery. An entire psychic change. An entire psychic change we're going to find means the exact same thing as down here where we talk about it. The very last step, what does it say that we had? A spiritual awakening. And here you'll also sometimes read it called a spiritual experience, spiritual awakening, recovered. All of these things mean the same thing. We don't probably have time today, maybe to get into, well, maybe we do have a few minutes. He's talking about solution, right? So just understand entire psychic change, if you want to underline that, it means the same thing as a spiritual experience, spiritual awakening. And I think that maybe we will take a minute to, I want to finish this paragraph. And if we have a minute, I want to go into what that means, this psychic change, because that's our solution. The only solution AA has to offer. And the doctor says, on the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once this psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired ever being able to solve them, he suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. Huh. And the only effort necessary being required to follow a few simple rules. There's a contingency here. We got to follow a few simple rules. 1, we got to have a spiritual experience, an entire psychic change. And 2, we got to follow a few simple rules. How many is a few? A few is generally referred to as 3, right? So the only few simple rules that I saw is going back to the beginning where he said, what happens? We get these ideas, we recover, we pass it on to others and insist that they do likewise with others. As long as they do that, he says, we're easily able to control our desire for alcohol. So what is this entire psychic change? I have just a couple minutes to cover that. It's the only time that I ever go outside of the first 196 pages of this book. And we will move on to page 567. And the only reason we go to this is that they did the first, what did I think I read that there were like something like 16 printings of the first edition. The first printing of the first edition was April of 1939. As soon as they were done with that first printing and passed it out before they did the second one, they added this appendix 2. Because when people read Bill's story and about his miraculous thing that happened to him of seeing God, they're like, Bill, we're doing these things, but we're not having that happen to us. What are we missing? And what he wants to go into doing is explaining what the spiritual experience is.
Everybody there? 567?
567, appendix 2. Top of the page, it says the term spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading, I think that means study, shows that, and I would underline this, this is the definition of a spiritual experience according to them, a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism. We're looking to have a personality change. And such a strong personality change that it's sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism, and that it has manifested itself among us in various different forms. Yes, it is true in our first printing gave many readers the impression that these personality changes or religious experiences must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. Okay, goes on to talking about the last paragraph on the page. Among our rapidly growing membership of thousands at the time they had this appendix come out, of alcoholics, these transformations, these sudden spectacular spiritual experiences, though they're frequent, they're by no means the rule. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. That's how it's happened with me. But I want to finish this saying, quite often friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. That has been certainly true with me. Any of you that are going through, or have gone through becoming recovered, have probably had somebody else coming to you saying, hey, you know, something's different about you. I notice you're smiling. I notice that you're making eye contact, you know, whatever it might be, well before I knew of any change going on. And it says that once that happens, that's when he finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life. That doesn't sound like sober. We're going to have a profound alteration or reaction to life, in that such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself. And I would underline this: what often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. They just told us there, based on their experience, when there were thousands of these guys, on average, how long it took for them to recover. How long does it take? Matter of a few months. That's how quickly this can be done. You know, Dr. Bob, as I've read, always emphasized the idea of putting no blocks between the newcomer and having a spiritual experience. And what are blocks? Blocks are just stay on step 1, 2, and 3. Don't get into step 4 till you've been sober a year. Now you're going to die if you don't recover. At any moment, you're in danger of drinking until you recover. How long do we want to hold them back? I like thinking of it as cancer. We find out you got cancer, you're terminal, you need chemo. Whoa. Why don't you learn about the chemo for a while first? Read up on it. You know, we won't get into actually giving you it for about a year, you know, and we think you're ready. No, that's crazy. Crazy, some of the things that come out of our ideas and opinions versus what's in this book.